Suicide Squad. Now I saw this movie. This won't be uploaded until like midday Friday, but it's technically Friday. It's almost 1 a.m. But I got to see it Thursday. Kind of the pseudo weird timing thing that they do on Thursday nights, where it starts showing at like 6, which I always thought that was kind of weird, but I always love it. So went to see this movie with my girlfriend. I heard the news, especially everyone freaking out over Rotten Tomatoes and trying to get Rotten Tomatoes like taken off the internet, I guess. But I was like, whatever. I'm like, it was weird. I was like, I just don't see how it could be a bad movie. I was going into it, I was still looking, excited. I'm like, looking at the trailers, I was thinking, of course, Batman v Superman, and I was like, man, if this sucks, they have like 2 more chances to make it right, because I'm not gonna skip the Justice League movie. But it was like, man, they got 1 more chance with Wonder Woman, and then I was like, oh, but then Justice League comes out, so they got 2 more chances with those movies, and that's it. But I went into it, and I was like, all right, I hope this doesn't suck, because of the reviews coming out, and some other stuff I heard from other people, where it's like, I heard from my friend it was kind of meh, and going to see it, I was like, this doesn't suck. Like, I enjoyed the movie. I actually thought it was pretty cool. There's some stuff, there's good to it, and there's bad to it, for sure. Oddly, there's quite a bit of both. It's almost split down the middle, but overall, I still enjoyed the movie. And I think the first part of the movie is really good. I think the first half is better than the second half, or really the first act is better than the, second and third act. But I think just, if I split it like right down the middle, the first part is better. I think it still has some good moments in, the later parts of the film, but overall, I thought the first part was better, like when it introduces the characters, because of course it's the Suicide Squad, so it's a bunch of people that no one really knows anything about. It's like, oh, we have, Harley, who everybody knows, Harley and Joker. We have Killer Croc, El Diablo, who I didn't know anything about, Captain Boomerang, who's Captain Boomerang, I've seen him, and then Slipknot, who I don't know anything about, because I'd never even heard of that guy. I don't think I'd ever heard of Slipknot or El Diablo before this movie, but I'd heard of everyone else. I'd seen them either in, like, Arrow, they did the Suicide Squad, and then they had to get rid of all of them because they were making the movie, so it was like, screw you, TV version. So they did all that, but they were cool. And, introducing the characters I thought was cool. They kind of did, I wasn't expecting this, but like how they did the trailers with the music and stuff, they actually did that a lot in the movie, and I personally enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool because they used different songs for the different characters, like, to convey this type of message or that type of message, and just who they were. And I was like, that's pretty sweet. I like how it worked out. I thought, and I think this is part of the reason why I like the movie so much, especially in the beginning, and overall I still enjoyed it, but I think because it didn't waste time doing like all this talking, like, oh, we have to introduce this person, so this is what they did, and this is what all these like 8 characters did. It was kind of like, here's a flashback, this is what happened. Certain characters are more important, like Deadshot and Harley are kind of like the 2 most important on the Suicide Squad. Harley, of course, because it's Harley Quinn, and then Deadshot because it's Will Smith. So they have like the most as far as backstory and stuff like that, and they do it. Of course, they do it through flashbacks. So it's like, it starts off really simple, and it's like, this is what we show as far as their introductions for the characters. It's really simple. It's them during their job. If they have some personal stuff that's worth noting, then we get to hear about that as well. And it was pretty easy. It was like, alright, you can infer some stuff, and then you get, for certain characters, you get more detail later on, like specifics as to, why this happened, or why this character acts this way. So I like that. Those simple, with cool introduction, show off the important characters, like especially their big actor characters. Go through it. It got straight to the action. It got right into the madness. And then, as it goes through, you have some cool action scenes. The first one was really half and half, because the first one was really dark, and that's always an issue. And if you've seen the trailer, you may have noticed that the things they fight, they aren't human. They're like these dark creatures. So when you have a dark fight scene with dark black creatures, it's a little difficult to exactly see the movements of the creatures and stuff like that. And it's nighttime through like the whole movie pretty much. Once they start the mission, at least, it's pretty much all nighttime. So when they do like the very first fight scene, it's like, it's a little hard to really see what's happening, but then they have like a really cool shot in there, and I won't say who does what, but the fight scene is kind of, generic, and you can't really see much. And then the ending of the first fight scene was really cool. It has a really cool moment, how they resolved the very first fight. Then it goes through, and it's like, alright, this happened, here's Joker here, and the Joker is kind of like Batman in this. They both show up, and it's really simple, really little. It makes sense why they both show up, and I kind of like the way they did it. Like Batman's very first appearance, I thought was actually really great because of the way it was done, and it was just like that makes perfect sense. You have this character Amanda Waller, and it's like, you know what, that makes perfect sense, and I just loved how they did that. I was like, that's just, it was really simple, but it made a ton of sense, and I was like, I love how they did that because it was super simple, but it just worked. So love how they first introduced Batman. Joker I thought was fine, you know, the first introduction for him as well. And I thought Jared Leto did a fine job, you know, of course it's the big thing after Heath Ledger. I thought he did a fine job. He wasn't really in it enough to have like a crazy epic analysis of like what did he do right and didn't do right and stuff. It's like he had like a couple of moments, honestly. But I thought he was fine. Like they made him, you know, the way they did it, I thought it was interesting because he seems to me at least much more um, business oriented, which you don't see too much in the movie versions of Joker, but I like that. Like they kind of went like old Batman with where he like has henchmen and stuff, and I was like, I like that because more recent stuff we haven't seen that. Even in some of the animated stuff, we don't really get to see it enough. I feel where like the Joker has his henchmen because he does. He always has. Typically, especially if you watch like Batman animated series, he always has like the same couple of dudes, and that's probably an animation thing, but he always has henchmen with him. It's not just him and Harley or just Joker doing crazy stuff. He always has henchmen. Like he does have, even though they never really talk about it because Joker's just insane and doing crazy stuff, he does have like an evil business thing going on, and that is really what he does. That's how he survives. He does actually like make money by stealing stuff and things like that. So I kind of like getting at least a glimpse of that. I thought it was pretty cool, and we got to see him do some stuff that they never really ever talk about, mostly because Joker is just supposed to be crazy. So I was like, I like that. Because for me, being an animated series fan, it's like I like getting to see him with actual henchmen that he tells them like, hey, you do this, or you know, he has a plan to do something, and he tells people what to do. So I actually really enjoyed that because we don't get to see it that often, and I feel like a lot of people might not even know that if you're not big into comics, or for younger viewers who may not have seen like the animated series stuff, who only have seen, especially you know like the Dark Knight, they might not really recognize the fact that Joker always has henchmen. He does have an actual business. He's not just, oh, that's the crazy clown guy who just kills a bunch of people. He actually has like a business and henchmen and stuff. So I thought that was a nice portrayal of his character. Thought it was acted well. Thought it was fine. As far as his look, I never really had a crazy issue with it, to be totally honest. And he kind of changes his clothes. You don't see him in like that purple jacket too often. Really, he actually has a couple of different outfits that you see him in. So I thought that was pretty cool. And early on, they have an amazing reference to a super famous piece of art that I loved. And I won't say it is not exactly pertaining to Joker, but it was super cool. Like if you've seen the picture before, it's in it's in the Batman universe, but if you've seen the picture before, they have a super epic reference to a very specific piece of art that's been done before. It's like a super famous picture. Like you've probably seen it, whether you're huge in the comics or not. So when that showed up, I was like, that was really cool. I love that they did that. It was a nice, simple little reference, but I was like, that was awesome, and I love getting to see that. So that was really cool. Going through it, and then we have the main mission, and that's kind of one of the biggest issues I have with the movie is that the mission they go on isn't really much of a mission. It's sort of like a non-mission mission. It's kind of like, well, this happened, so let's do it. And that kind of sucked to me. I was like, oh, that's a little disappointing. Like, it has cool moments in between it, but like ultimately, the mission itself doesn't lend to some of the greatest moments. Like, it does a little bit, but mostly because of the fight scenes. But story-wise, it's really just the characters themselves that really make it entertaining. The mission itself is like, meh. Like, it has maybe one really good moment is really truly created because of the mission that they're going on. And early on, technically, how the mission gets set up is pretty cool. But the actual mission itself is just like, alright, we go from point A to point B and fight in between. And that's pretty much how it goes all the way through. And the stuff in between is kind of cool, but then it's like, the whole point is this mission. Like, it's the suicide mission for the Suicide Squad. And the mission itself was just like, nah, it was super logical, just like the Batman thing. It was like, it makes perfect sense how this happened and why it happened that way, but it was still just like a meh sort of mission where it's like, yeah, it's easy to understand. It's like nothing tricky or anything about it. It's just like, so-so. But overall, I did enjoy it. and that was kind of one of the big things. Was like the mission itself was just sort of meh. But then there was some other stuff in it, and I want to say this for last. And I didn't spend nearly as much time talking as I thought I would, but I'm probably still gonna do way more of this because I'll be talking about the specific dialogue and stuff like that. But there's some stuff because my girlfriend hated the movie um, because it does have a lot of like stereotypes in it, and that's a huge thing. Especially well for me, um, Killer Croc was my biggest issue, but her biggest issue was Deadshot and Will Smith because they made him like the gangster sort of character, and then El Diablo is like literally a gangster character, which was fairly obvious from the trailers. You could tell that, but you couldn't tell that from the Deadshot stuff. But with El Diablo, you can tell because of the tattoos. You could clearly see that, and for me, I think the reason I didn't dislike it as much as she did was because although they were definitely stereotypes, I was like, I felt like they broke away enough because of some of the other elements that they did, and she was bothered by some of the dialogue, which, like I said, I'm gonna wait to my spoiler thing for that, and it didn't really bother me as much as far as like some of the dialogue, but some stuff was definitely obvious, and for me, excuse me, Killer Croc was my biggest issue, and there's a specific line which I'll talk about in the spoiler thing, but if you've seen it, um, it's like the line he says like the very end of the movie. I think it's the last line he says in the whole movie, and I was like, that's okay, like all right, because it was like, man, that was like almost super duper racist. It was super stereotypical, and I didn't know the guy was black. The actor that plays him, I was not black. He's African, so technically difference. But he's an African guy, and I didn't know that. I just assumed it was just some random buff person. You can't tell because the makeup is like full body makeup, and I didn't know that until he said something. And he doesn't say too much throughout the movie because it's like, well, we got other more important actors over here to show off. But going through it, it was like, all right, he says a line here, and I think it was like maybe the third thing he said. It may have been like the very first thing, like just what he said and how they had him say it. I was like, oh, he's a black guy. Like, that's a black guy for sure. And it was just the way they had him speak was, like, very stereotypical to me. And then they made it super obvious, like, with that very last line. And that was, like, my biggest issue was him. Because the way they did Will Smith's character, he has certain lines for sure. But I didn't think he was, like, too stereotypical. I thought it was, like, he has elements, but I thought they also kind of broke away from it. But for Killer Croc, I was like, this is... somehow they found a way to make Killer Croc, who I've never even considered Killer Croc even formerly being black or white, because he's a giant alligator guy. I've never even remotely thought of what race he was before he was the giant giant crocodile guy. But when they give him like certain dialogue, it's like, oh, it's really obvious who he is and how it's kind of stereotypical. So that was a big issue I had. It was really with his character more than anybody else. And there was some stuff for sure with Will Smith, but personally I didn't think it was an issue like she did for sure. But it definitely has some of that in there, and like I said, I can't really get too much into it because it's spoiler free. But it certainly has some issues to it as far as like stereotypical dialogue, and it's really only with people of color, and to be totally honest. And that was, of course, like the big issue. Like there were no sort of white stereotypes or anything like that. It was like black stereotypes and Latino stereotypes and stuff like that. And it's just little issues. And the Latino thing, for me personally, I thought was super small, but I'm also not Latino, so might be something I didn't recognize nearly as much because I'm not. So it was one of those things, but it's definitely noticeable. And my girlfriend like hated the movie because of that. But I still enjoyed it. It's one of those things where I definitely noticed some stuff, like like I said, lines of dialogue that certainly got my attention, but then there was little stuff that didn't really bother me too much, and it was stuff you could still notice, but it's like, alright, I felt that was on the racial scale, at least small enough to where that's like a little issue that I have, but ultimately I felt the characters were done well, and that was something, that's kind of how you, honestly, at this point, you kind of have to look at it that way, where it's like, that's a bit of an issue, but they fix it with the rest of the character, and with Killer Croc they didn't, because he wasn't that important because he wasn't a huge actor, so it's kind of like they didn't really focus on him. It was just the stereotypes, and that's why for me it was Killer Croc that was the biggest issue, because I was like, every time he speaks, it's just the way he says stuff is like the super stereotypical kind of black language that you hear in movies and stuff. So that was the biggest issue I had with it. Ultimately, though, I would still say it's a fun movie. I still had a fun time with it. Obviously, with all the crazy reviews going around and this and that, and it coming after Batman v Superman, I still say it's way more entertaining than that. I mean, Batman v Superman sucks to me, to be totally honest, plain and simple. I just think that movie is boring. But this I thought was fun, especially with, like I said, the first part, and it's probably because it jumps straight into it, and I thought it was really cool. I was like, all right, they show off the characters, they do it well. As a Suicide Squad movie, because I know the Suicide Squad and what they do, I thought it was done well. It's like ultimately how everything played out. I was like, this is kind of how it had to play out. It could have played out better if the mission was more entertaining, and change up some of that dialogue. But as a Suicide Squad movie, I was like, this is kind of what it should have been. Like, it kind of works, especially if you've seen the DC animated Suicide Squad movie. I believe there's only one. There's probably more, but I only know of one of them. And I was thinking about that as I was watching the movie, and I'm like, okay, as it goes through, it kind of works. It's not as entertaining as far as the actual mission, because, like I said, it's almost like they didn't really even go on a mission when kind of go through the story, but it was still entertaining, and the characters, really, the character moments were the best part to me, at least. Like the characters interacting with each other and getting to see these new interpretations of the characters. I thought it was cool, minus some of the stereotypical stuff. But ultimately, I'd still say it was fun. Obviously, I'm talking a lot about the stereotypes, and they're there if you look, or if you even notice that type of stuff. Some people definitely don't, but that's something to know, and that admittedly, it probably wouldn't affect people who are white, because there aren't really any white stereotypes in there. But if you're black or Latino or even Asian, so there's, it's not exactly a stereotype that they did with Katana. It's just like a weird thing that they did that kind of makes no sense whatsoever, because I can't get into it because of spoilers, but it's like, just what I know about her character, it was just a weird thing. Not even what I know about her character, it was just the way they did her dialogue. It was weird, and I can't be any more detailed with that because it'll kind of give it away. But it was just a really weird issue. Like, it was something that was so easy to get rid of, but it was such a weird issue to even have. And I've seen that before, where it's like, that's a weird thing to have in a thing where it's done this way. So that's all I can say without getting into it. But I still recommend the movie, to be totally honest. I don't get nearly as bothered as my girlfriend. She basically like detests the movie now because of the dialogue and stuff. But I was like, for me, it was Killer Croc, and because he didn't say much throughout the movie, that's kind of why it didn't bother me. Just every time, seriously, every time he talked, I was like, or most of the time at least, it was like, if it's more than a word, I was kind of a little bothered by it, because it was like super stereotypical the way they had him speak. And maybe that's how he talks, but obviously he doesn't have to, because it's a movie. So it's one of those things. So that's why it really got me. It was just Killer Croc. I didn't even really feel bothered by what they did with Deadshot, although they definitely changed him up for sure. If you know Deadshot, if you've watched Arrow or seen the animated DC movie, or you know Deadshot, you maybe played the Batman Arkham games, totally different. And it seems like they definitely did that because it's like, well, instead of him being white, he's black, so let's make him like this. And it definitely kind of feels that way when you watch the movie. But despite all that, I'd still say check it out because it's a fun movie. I never looked at Rotten Tomatoes, I never do, but I don't know how bad the scores are. They must be like terrible on there. But I enjoyed it. I was like, I don't know. I mean, based on what I've heard with people not liking it, I haven't heard anything about the race stuff, although admittedly it's from white people that I've watched reviews so far. So maybe, like I said, some things you just don't really notice, and some things you are not in that world of. For instance, the Killer Croc thing, like that last line, just if you've seen it already, but I'm going to talk about that in the spoiler video. But despite all that, I'd still recommend it because I still think it was a fun movie, ultimately. There was one thing, and this isn't dialogue or anything. They did the slow motion thing like Batman v Superman. There's one point in the whole movie where I was like, this is too much slow motion. And you'll know it when you see it because there's basically no slow motion, and like pretty much the whole movie, there's like it's like a little bit here and there and some stuff where it's like, yeah, it's slow motion to show off something cool and it makes sense, but they don't overdo it like Batman v Superman, except for literally one part in the whole movie, and I was like, this is it's taking a long time right here. It was like the one thing where I was like, that's just way too much slow motion, and it was just like, all right, here we go. It's sort of the big thing, and gotta watch it in slow motion. So okay, but it just seemed like way too much slow motion to me for that part. But still recommend it despite its issues. All the crappy reviews and or not crappy reviews, but crappy feelings towards the movies. I don't really see it. I'd have to really check those reviews to see exactly what they say. Um, I heard one review where someone mentioned that they were upset that Joker wasn't the main villain. They clearly don't know the Suicide Squad. If that was an issue for you, you have no idea who the Suicide Squad is. So sorry that you got disappointed by that. And I felt like they didn't really talk that up. I don't know. That's just what I heard in one review. So I was like, I felt like I thought it was obvious that Joker and Batman were like huge in the movie. And Joker, it seemed like he'd be in it more, but he is in it for, he comes in at like bits and pieces. He's not in it or is like, hey, I'm here for like this long stretch of time. So he's definitely not in it nearly as much as you'd think. But I don't know why people would think he's the main villain. Like, if you saw the first trailer, there's that giant thing that destroys the train. I'm like, clearly it's not going to be Joker doing that. So, I don't know. That was something I noticed when I heard that review. I was like, why would anyone think Joker was the main villain when there's this giant tree thing blowing up a train? So, that was just something I thought of. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about this movie. If you prefer to just wait, you can, put comments on my spoiler video, which I'll put a link to down in the description below. But if there's anything vague you'd like to mention, or if you want to put spoiler videos, you can just make sure you put a spoiler tag so other people don't see it. I'll definitely talk to you in the comments for sure. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about it if you've seen it already. So please comment below. Let me know favorite parts, least favorite parts. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a spoiler video, so I'll get into all the real crazy issues and some of the things I really liked about it there. But of course, like I said, I want to know what you guys thought about it, and definitely thank you guys for watching.